Okay, good afternoon, everyone. You're probably expecting Steve Shirtliff. So Steve and I are colleagues. We both work at the university. Steve and I are both teaching this semester, and Steve actually thought he was talking tomorrow, and he found out last week that it was today, and he actually has a lab on Thursday afternoons. So he sent me an email on Thursday saying, "Can you do it?" And I said, well, and I thought this was in Regina, and I said, I can't make Regina. Then he came back and he said, it's in Saskatoon, so I said, okay. One of the rules, the first rules that you have in public speaking is never give someone else's presentation. And I've broken that rule many times over my 36-year career, and I'm doing it again today. So I'll do my best. If it's a little disorganized, I finished it at 11:15 this morning, so, but I think we got some good stuff in there. So to get started, I just want to give you a little sales pitch here. The University of Saskatchewan is offering or has offered an online course in organic weed control. I forgot to bring the brochures here, but I will bring them later today, and you'll be able to get them at the front desk either later today or tomorrow. So that, if you're interested in that, please sign up. Okay, I wanted to just, so as was mentioned, I've worked at my careers now, I'm in my 36th year. Actually, when I was asked to do Organic Connections 2 years ago, I said, yeah, that sounds good. That'll probably be the last time I do it. So I'm doing it again, and I'm not going to say this is the last time I'll do it, because who knows. But it actually began in the 1990s, the mid-1990s, and I was involved with it in the beginning. We got funding from the federal government, the Scott Research Farm, to do research work in mechanical weed control, or in organic weed control, and we didn't really weren't really sure what to do with that, but we got lots of input from organic producers and started focusing on mechanical weed control. So we did work in pre-emergence rod weeding, in-crop harrowing, and rotary hoeing. Now, we weren't the first to do organic research in the prairies. Certainly Martin Entz would probably lay claim to that. But then Steve Shirtliff joined the faculty at the university in the late 90s, and he started to kind of took over the role of doing non-chemical weed control and organic weed control, and he focused on some of the stuff I learned, but expanded on it, and then integrated it with other cultural methods as well. And I think really in the last decade in Saskatchewan, Steve's lab has certainly led the way in research on integrating cultural and mechanical weed control methods, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. The other thing that's happened from this research over the years is Steve has trained, and I've been involved with it, and others as well. We've trained some very good students, graduate students, some of them are in the industry, some of them are back farming, and some are becoming research scientists. And I actually had recommended to Nadine that she get one of these people to speak, but you need 36 years of experience to speak in a week's notice, I guess. But Lena Sorovi, she works for Steve right now, and is doing some interesting work on weed clipping. Catherine Stanley did some work on aerial cultivation, and now is leading some really interesting research in mechanical weed control in beans, plus intercropping and that sort of things at the University of Manitoba. And he spoke at the organic conference a couple years ago. Alex Alba. Alex is from the Ukraine. He's a great student, very innovative. So that's not his postal code below that. That's short for Defense Thesis Soon. Looking for a job. So, okay, so today I'm going to focus on 4 things. I'm going to talk quite a bit about seeding rates, because that's still your most reliable weed control tool. is having your crop compete. And I'll show you, we've got data on just about every crop and that you can think imaginable. And under organic conditions, we do see benefits for increasing seeding rates in terms of better yields and better weed suppression, no matter the crop. Then we'll move into some mechanical weed control, and then into IMC, where we've been integrating mechanical and cultural methods. So most of that is Alex's work. And we'll talk a little bit about harvest weed seed management as well. So in terms of crop seeding rate, as I mentioned, basically we're just increasing the plant population to aid in competitions with weeds. So, you know, the original seeding rate work that would have been done in the the early 1900s, those would have been all under weed-free conditions. Those would have been hand-weeded plots and that sort of thing. And it wasn't until actually Ken Kirkland started some work in the 70s looking at, well, let's see if these seeding rates are actually applicable in weedy conditions, that we started looking at higher seeding rates. So let's start with wheat. And you're going to see a lot of curves that look pretty well the same, but in this case, you can see that our yield increases, keeps increasing as we increase seeding rate. Our weed biomass goes down, and so I'll show this. If we just look at the effect on yield, we're kind of topping out at 300 seeds per square meter. That's not really that excessive. But, you know, I mean, a lot of people will seed at 90 pounds to the acre. So if you, and I think you should be seeding higher than that. We like to think that there's nothing wrong with looking at 400 seeds per square meter with your wheat. If you're in a wetter area, you may experience some lodging. That's the only problem that we've had, but that could be overcome with maybe selecting something with good straw strength. I'm going to give you a lot of stuff in seeds per square meter because I want you to think in those terms. I won't give you a rate in bushels per acre. You got to quit thinking about that, okay? You got to think of pounds and units and the number of seeds, the actual number of seeds you're putting in a unit area. Now this isn't an organic crop per se, or this isn't even really a crop being grown in Canada right now, but I did a fair amount of work on it, and it's Ethiopian mustard, and the principle also applies to those of you that are growing yellow or brown mustard organically. So Ethiopian mustard was being developed as an industrial oil. It still is, and eventually will be probably used in jet fuel. And the reason being is that the emissions are extremely low, and it's really a drop in jet fuel. It doesn't require much in terms of transformation or processing to make it into jet fuel. So I was given the task of trying to come up with some weed control options, and we looked at various herbicides, but I also looked at seeding rates, and this actually just got published, and you're going to want to focus on the top line here. And so the seeding, as we increase seeding rates from 50 to 300 seeds per square meter, we reduced our weed biomass by about 65%. Now we consider, if I'm doing herbicide research, I consider 70% suppression. And one very frustrating thing about this research was that, you know, the people involved and wanted herbicides, and they said that farmers wouldn't seed above 6 pounds to the acre. And you know, really, at seeding rates of 300 seeds per square meter, that's pretty high. 50 seeds per square meter is 2.5 pounds per acre. So if you're getting up around 200, you're around 12 pounds per acre. It's not terrible, you know, terribly high seeding rate. And I think that, that's what you should be considering, somewhere between 10 and 12 pounds per acre if you're seeding mustard organically. And I just kind of throw a curve in there just to show that if we go, 150, going from 150 to 300 seeds per square meter, we're not improving weed control all that much. And so that would, that'd be 12.5 kilograms per hectare roughly, or pounds per acre. Even hemp. So there's Mr. and Mrs. Hemp having a romantic moment there. And a colleague of mine, Cecil Vera, did some work in the early 2000s looking at seeding rates and its effect on weed interference. And the same sort of thing, his yields went up and biomass decline. For conventional seeding, for seed production, we're suggesting somewhere between 20 to 30 kilograms per hectare, but certainly if you're gonna have to look at the economics of it because seed costs can be fairly high. But I think at least increasing that seeding rate by 50% will certainly benefit you in terms of reducing weed competition in hemp as well. So field peas, now you're starting to get some fairly large seeds and some fairly high seed costs. And our typical seeding rate, our recommended seeding rate is about 88 seeds per square meter. And again, that would depend on what variety of pea you have, but it's roughly 170 pounds per acre. So when you start talking higher seeding rates, you think, oh man, that's a huge cost associated with it. But the yield does tend to increase. So Steve's grad student, Julia Baird, she actually looked at the economics of this as well. And even doubling that seeding rate seems like an awful lot of seed, but it was profitable to do that. There was a $70 per hectare increase in net returns by doubling the seeding rate under organic conditions. Faba bean, I want you to focus on the two curves with the arrows. It follows the same sort of trends as everything else. I told Nadine that I'm not doing that much research or organic research anymore, but I guess I still do indirectly because this is a seeding rate experiment with faba beans, and I'm doing it under weed-free and weedy conditions. And we typically are recommending about 40 seeds per square meter under conventional production. And if you look at that curve, let's go back. If you look at the curve, you can see under our weedy conditions, we're kind of flattening out somewhere in here. So, I think we could, again, we'll have to look at we haven't looked at the economics, but I wouldn't be afraid to recommend 60 to 80 seeds per square meter for faba beans right now. Lentil seeding rate. Lentil was a crop that we thought it wouldn't matter what you do, you'd have problems if you're trying to grow it organically. And we kind of felt originally that crops like lentils and flax wouldn't benefit from higher seeding rates, but Steve went ahead and did the work anyways. So the red line there is the traditional seeding rate that Dr. Slinkard came up with years ago of about 130 seeds per square meter. But you can see that we got increases in yield, and well, this is actually crop biomass and weed biomass, and decreases in weed biomass as we increased the seeding rate. And if you look at the effect on, I missed the slide, but if I left the slide out, but the seed yields were similar to that biomass increase. Biomass usually is related to seed yield. And we're recommending with small seeded lentils now somewhere about double the seeding rate of 300 seeds per square meter, or 250 seeds per square meter at least. Flax, I'll talk a little bit about this some more, but you can see we're seeing some benefits is going as high as 2,000 plants per square meter. So that's well over double the seeding rate recommended right now. But again, you don't have much competition with flax. It's one of the poorest competitors. I think in terms of crops, only onions have a lower leaf area index than flax does. So you got to rely fairly heavily on getting a good uniform stand if you're going to get good flax yields. Now, this is a website that you can go to if you want to figure out how to calculate your seeding rates based on seed weight and or 1,000 seed weight and the desired plant populations. So I was going to go through a calculation, but I think for the sake of time, it's probably just as easy to refer you to that website. And also, though, don't use their default 1,000 seed weights. You know, count out your own. If you don't want to count out 1,000 seeds, count out 250 at least and multiply it by 4. You know, the seed weight, the 1,000 seed weight can vary dramatically from seed lot to seed lot. So I think the bottom line from the work that we've done, Steve's done, and others on seeding rate is that really any crop can benefit from a higher seeding rate, particularly if you're an organic producer. Steve had a graduate student who did both his master's and PhD at the University of Saskatchewan. He's now back he's from Sri Lanka originally. He's back there teaching. Dilshan's master's program was looking at integrated weed management in oats. And he was focusing on wild oat primarily, because even for conventional growers, there aren't any wild oat herbicides that you can use in oat. So this was one of maybe Steve's first real integrated study where we looked at a number of different factors and where he looked at a number of different factors and see how they all interacted. And you know, when I started my career or started doing work on organic weed control, you know, our attitude was, well, you know, that kind of worked, but it didn't work very well, so you know, you kind of blew it off. And then as we went along, we started thinking, well, maybe these things that work, sort of work, maybe if we start adding them all up, we'll get things to work. We'll get really good control. And that's kind of what we're finding. It's not a silver bullet or a single factor that's going to work effectively, but a combination of a number of different agronomic practices. So Steve likes to say good agronomy is good weed control, and I agree with that. So in terms of the oat study, though, what we looked at was a competitive and a non-competitive variety. Typically, the forage oats are quite competitive. A low and high seeding rate, and that was 250 and 500 seeds per square meter. Two different row widths, so a 6-inch row and a 12-inch row, so fairly narrow rows. And then he also looked at in-crop harrowing. We typically don't think of harrowing as being a practice that we use for wild oats, and if you look actually at some older information on in-crop harrowing, it'll say do not harrow oats. And I won't show the data, but Steve and I did some work quite a few years ago, and we found oats to be perfectly tolerant to harrowing. In fact, slightly more tolerant than barley and wheat. So there's nothing wrong with harrowing oats, actually. And I think perhaps that the only way that that ended up in some bulletins was that, well, oats related to a weed, and we try to control weeds with harrowing, so you probably shouldn't harrow oats. But we did a fair amount of work on it, and we found that you can, and this study shows it as well. So just to show you visually as to some things and how it turned out, this is a low seeding rate, wider rows, no harrowing. So certainly one of the poorer treatments. Increasing the seeding rate with the wider rows certainly benefited. No harrowing as well. This is a higher seeding rate in narrow rows. So you're starting to see some more crop and less weeds growing between the rows. And this is our best treatment, 500 plants per square meter, narrow rows with harrowing. Now again, if you were just to harrow by itself, you're not going to find great results, but when you combine them, you end up with some real benefits. So if you look at all the factors by themselves, if we just increase the crop density, we increased our yield by 11%. Okay. If we harrowed, we increased our yield by 13%. This just actually shows that when you have no weeds, so if you look at Kern in 2008, we had no weeds, so you really saw no benefit. There was no need to harrow. It was a very dry spring. But typically, we found that certainly our weed density declined fairly dramatically, or total weed density anyways. So we also looked at other weeds, and like wild mustard, for example. So this would be an unharrowed wild mustard treatment, and this would be a harrowed treatment. In terms of variety, the CDC Baylor, we had lower weed biomasses, just a more competitive variety than Ronald. And like I said, unfortunately, the forage varieties are the ones that tend to be more competitive because they have the wider leaves. But that's one thing I think you want to look for in terms of an oat variety, is something that covers the ground fairly quickly and has a good leaf area to it. So growth rate in terms of whether it makes a variety competitive or not is really important. So a fast-growing variety early in the season, something that has good seedling vigor, is one that you want to choose. And so just a more competitive variety, we reduced weed biomass by 22%. In terms of weed biomass, when we looked at crop density, we reduced weed biomass by 52% by doubling it. And so when we combined the harrowing and the higher crop densities, though, remember we had about 11% for each of them. And so there was an additive effect there. We had about 25% yield increase by combining the two. When we combined, in terms of weed biomass, when we combined the competitive cultivar high crop density and harrowing, we reduced weed biomass by about 71%. And we were actually starting out with pretty good agronomy, to begin with, 250 seeds per square meter, typical row spacings and that sort of thing. So, like I mentioned earlier, we consider 71% control with a herbicide as suppression. So when you look at everything, if you look at things in isolation, so you got to think of stacking things, I guess, in order to get the level of weed control that you're going to find acceptable. So I want to talk a little bit now, move into integrated mechanical and cultural weed management in organic pulses. This has been a pretty big focus of Steve over the past years. Alex has done a lot of work on that, and Catherine Stanley. I did some initial work at Scott as well. So we've looked at, I won't talk about it, but we looked at pre-emergence rod weeding in peas. I see Morris, I talked to him about a rod weeder this morning because you couldn't get a rod weeder for a number of years. And if you timed it right, you seed your peas a little deep, rod weed between emergence or between seeding and crop emergence, 4 to 5 days after, you can end up with a really clean seed bed to begin with. And it was quite interesting when I presented this information in Europe a number of years ago, and the question I kept getting was, can you send us a rod weeder? And so I asked, at that time Morris had quit making them, but we did send them over a dead rod from Lethbridge, and the last time I was in Europe was a few years ago, but there was a presentation there and they were talking about how great this rod weeder worked, so I guess I'll be known for introducing the rod weeder to Europe, 60 years after, or probably 80 years after its introduction. But we've also looked at in-crop harrowing, and we've looked at a number of different types of harrows. Just conventional tine harrows, Flextine Harrows. It's all a matter of setting them properly. Now, some harrows have more settings on them than others. If you got just an ordinary tine harrow, what I like to suggest is you set your harrows at a 45-degree backwards, okay? Slopes, don't set them, the more vertical you set them, the more injury you're going to get. If you set them backwards, you don't reduce your weed control, but you actually, your crop tolerance increases quite dramatically. Speed is also important. It used to be said that if, when you do post-emergence harrowing, don't look back, just go. I don't like you to do that. I like you to get out and look. And if you don't see any green crop with your harrowing, you're causing too much damage. You're probably doing yourself a disservice. So I like to see about 30% of the crop still visible after harrowing. So Alex, he's young and innovative, and he likes to make videos, and so he's got this, I hope I can get this to run. He's got this neat little video. There we go. They mounted a little camera. There he is harrowing some peas. This is a Flextine Harrow, and so you can see, it keeps the rows intact. Those vibrate, pulling the weeds out. And they're really intended for sugar beets. So, a sugar beet is a very solid plant, and when that Flextine would hit it, of course, it goes around the plant and then uproots the small weeds. So, again, the Flextine Harrow, one thing about it is there's lots of different adjustments you can make with it, and so that's the thing I like about it, is that you can set it according to your soil conditions, and you can adjust it. Well, we go about 5 miles an hour because we can't go any faster on small plots, okay? So in terms of speed, that would be if you have not very many settings on your harrow, then the only way you can adjust your selectivity or your injury is by your speed, by slowing down. So I would set by speed again by how much injury you're getting on your crop. So the next implement I bought to try was a Lentil rotary hoe, and you'll never guess who I bought it from. I bought it from Monsanto, if you can believe. But it was being used in eastern Canada, and originally rotary hoes were intended to just break a surface crust and help with the emergence of soybeans. But it was also found that it could be used in terms of weed control. And the one reason I wanted a Lentil rotary hoe is, of course, one of the criticisms of organic production is that we do too much tillage. And so I wondered if this Lentil rotary hoe could actually work in the presence of crop residues. They said it could. And the reason it's slightly different than a conventional rotary hoe is just the distance between those two gangs. So these arms are extended, and there's a wider spacing there, so it tends not to get plugged with residue. And we found that that was the case. when I did research on it at Scott, I went up to 6 passes and really didn't excessively, it knocked the residue down, but it stayed on the surface and protected it from erosion. The other thing I found was pulse crops were extremely tolerant to it, just about at any crop stage, and I could go up to 6 passes without causing much crop injury. So in terms of implement, if you compare the harrow to the rotary hoe probably is a little safer on the crop, but the harrow probably provides a little better weed control. And here's Alex again. Now, add some rock music to it. There he goes. Now, in terms of speed, this is where speed is great. The faster you can, if you can get up to 12 mile an hour, or even a little better, it works better. The faster you go, the better. And it doesn't matter, it's just in terms of weed control. So you can imagine with our smaller plots, we have to take quite a run at it to get to 12 mile an hour, but our technicians, they just love rotary hoeing. And things are flying and rocks and all sorts of things. So, the last thing we worked on, and I did a little bit of work on this, but Steve's been doing more work, is inter-row cultivation. And the technology for inter-row cultivation is really making leaps and bounds. Gafford has, a system that automatically adjusts for the row, and they have cameras and that sort of thing. You can cultivate in rows as narrow as 8 inches, actually, with quite a bit of accuracy. They're reasonably expensive, but I think they will come down in price as people use them, and I know some farmers actually have them. Catherine Stanley has one of them. We have an older one where we have to sit behind and steer it, or walk behind. So that's why we have graduate students to do that sort of thing. So Catherine's first work was just looking at inter-row cultivation by itself, and she was just trying to determine the best time for cultivating in terms of crop tolerance and weed control. So this is a practice you can't do very early because of course, you need the rows up, and you need the crop up a bit so you're not causing too much crop burial, because you're throwing soil, and you don't want to be, you throw some of that over the crop row. So the crop has to be a little bit advanced. And then she found too, though, that as it got too advanced, she was causing quite a bit of injury. So what she found was somewhere between the 5 and 10 node stage was the optimum time to be inter-row cultivating. And, whoops. So when I originally did the research on inter-row cultivation, one thing I found, of course, was problems with you don't control weeds within the row. And so we needed to find a way to resolve that. Oops. But before I get into that, just in terms of what weeding machine is best, I think Alex and Steve and I would agree that there's not one perfect one out there. Each has their own strengths. Certainly, in terms of the rotary hoe, you have the widest timing that you can use it within the crop, either before or when the crop's up. But you have a very narrow weed stage. So the weeds, we say, have to be in the white thread stage to early cotyledon. So they're just starting to emerge. If they get too many leaves on them, then they become quite tolerant. So in terms of rotary hoeing, you're really basing that on your weed stage as much as your crop stage. In terms of harrowing, crop tolerance is fair to good. You have a much narrower window of when you can, when you're looking at in-crop harrowing. You can't go as late. The interesting thing, though, is if you do harrow it late, you think, well, you're really not, you don't bury the crop much, so you think, well, you're not doing that much damage. But when we actually measure yield, the later we harrowed, the more yield loss we would get under weed-free conditions, so when we're evaluating crop tolerance. In terms of inter-row cultivation, I mentioned, the crop you want in the 5 to 10 nodes, and they're really, it's kind of we think of it as your last line of defense, not your only line of defense. If you're relying on strictly inter-row cultivation, you might be disappointed. So these are some pictures of what Alex's plots look like before rotary hoeing and after rotary hoeing. So those would be on my right. In the middle, it's before harrowing and after harrowing, and then before inter-row cultivation and after inter-row cultivation. So some pretty nice results. And just some more pictures. So if you look in the middle one, I think even rotary hoeing, that's rotary hoeing with a high seeding rate, 2 rotary hoes. Looks pretty good for lentils. In the middle, you're looking at the untreated on the left, and the rotary hoe with inter-row tillage at a high seeding rate beside it, and then rotary hoe high seeding rate, rotary hoe harrow and inter-row tillage, all 3 of them together with the low seeding rate. When you do all 3, you're causing a lot of crop injury. I don't think you really want to do all 3. And one thing I think that the reason Alex had so much success with this is that this was a guy that didn't mind working long hours and weekends, so if he had to go in on a weekend and harrow or inter-row cultivate, he did it all at the right time. And so timing is really critical with mechanical weed control. You have to be on top of things. And I know when Ian Cushion spoke at the last Organic Connections meeting, he did make the point that to inter-row cultivate his entire farm is almost impossible just because of time. And so he focused that sort of cultivation or the more mechanical weed control on the crops of higher value, like his pulses. Okay. So if we look at the weed biomass, again, if we just look at seeding rate, we decline, or the weed biomass in lentil decreased about 16%, just going to a high seeding rate. Every mechanical weed control practice did cause a decline, but typically we saw best where we had at least 2 of them, where we were using either the rotary hoe and the harrow, the harrow inter-row tillage. Rotary hoe and inter-row tillage was particularly good. HW is hand weed, and that's always the best treatment. So if you can afford hundreds of summer students, that's your best treatment. Okay. Yeah, and so one of his best treatments he's showing here was, that he liked definitely, was rotary hoe inter-row tillage, and again, we're getting about a 76% decline in weed biomass. Now these are all annual weeds, and this is done on organic, that land is grown organically at, so we have the typical weed problems that most organic growers have. We have wild mustard, lamb's quarters, green foxtail. Those are primary weeds. In terms of the effect it had on yield, we looked at increasing, now there was no interaction, so what it meant is if we increased the seeding rate, we saw the similar benefits in terms of the inter-row tillage, so they were additive. You got additive benefits by doing that. And our best treatment was a rotary hoe inter-row tillage, and things are moving automatically here. I'm not sure why. But we got a 55% increase in yield, seed yield. So again, you combine the two, and you're probably looking at 70 to 80% increase in seed yield by including the higher seeding rate. So again, a few slides. He's got some peas in there, because I'll talk about peas afterwards. And you can see, the peas, how weedy they are. Lots of green foxtail in there prior to inter-row cultivation. And that was just some late emergence that year, fairly dry in the spring. Should get really good control of them. But when you get really high densities, you'll get flushes of them as well. So this was a single pass with inter-row tillage, low seeding rate in peas. One of the better treatments, again, in the center, where you look at the untreated versus the rotary hoe, followed by inter-row cultivation at the high seeding rate. Now, he got a little carried away in the first year, and like I said, you can overdo it. And typically we saw when we combined three of them, you were causing too much damage. And part of this picture was taken in the first year of his experiments, and I said to Alex, I said, you got to be on top of these things when those weeds are in that white thread stage. Get the rotary hoe out there, no matter how many times you have to do it. And I shouldn't have told him that, because he did it way too many times, and same with the harrowing. So you can overdo it, and you got to find the right balance in terms of crop injury and weed control. So he found similar trends in terms of weed biomass. The rotary hoe, though, and the harrow by itself worked pretty good. But when you combine two of them, you typically got your lowest levels of weed biomass, and there really wasn't a benefit to in going to three mechanical practices. In terms of yield, any sort of practice helped increase the yield. The trend, although not statistically different, was basically, again, the rotary hoe inter-row tillage had slightly higher yields, but that could be just experimental error. And an increase, as we've talked about a number of times, just by increasing the seeding rate. So if you look at all the, when it's all said and done, really all the in-crop mechanical weed control methods reduced weed biomass. The most consistent treatment was the rotary hoe, followed later by inter-row tillage. And so what, right now we're recommending, or we're suggesting, if you can, you go to a higher seeding rate. Well, that's a given, because anyone can do that. If you have a rotary hoe, then rotary hoe. If you don't, then harrow. And if you have an inter-row cultivate, followed by that. And you can get some really nice weed control. There's some conventional growers that would be more than satisfied with the type of weed control that you can see there. We're certainly not, if you got group 2 resistant, or you got herbicide resistant wild mustard and kochia, you're not getting plots or fields that look like that. Now, we always get questions about perennial weeds. Where we did have Canada thistle, the inter-row cultivation didn't really do much. And of course, the harrow or the rotary hoe doesn't do much to Canada thistle as well. But for annual weed control, it's pretty good combinations. Okay, so I'm getting old and I need breaks, and I'm going to show you another video, but this is a nice one that Alex put together that kind of summarizes everything. And some loud music again.
Weeds are the major challenge in organic production. Currently, mechanical weed control and cultural methods are the only effective tools for weed control in these systems. Pulse crops such as field pea and lentil are poor with competitors due to a slow rate of growth and late canopy closure. Yield loss due to weeds can be as high as 80% if weed management is not effective. My name is Alexander Alba, and I would like to share my research on mechanical weed control in organic field peas. The rotary hoe is very efficient in controlling small-seeded weed species, such as green foxtail and wild mustard. Perfect timing for the rotary hoe is when the weeds are in a white thread stage and are barely visible on a soil surface, until cotyledon stage. At this time, they can be easily flicked out from the soil surface with the spinning tines. 2 passes back and forth during each application can successfully control the majority of target weeds. Additionally, even after multiple passes, there is no effect on crop residue, so it can be utilized under no-till conditions. Despite a very narrow application window, it can go surprisingly fast, with a speed up to 15 km an hour, allowing effective weed control even on a large scale within a short period of time. The harrow is a common tool among organic producers. Here, we are looking at the Flextine Harrow. The concept behind the Flextine Harrow is to control the weeds through the combination of uprooting and soil covering. The tines of the Flextine Harrow are adjustable, can be set for appropriate aggressiveness, which allows improved weed control and lowers the risk of crop injury. The inch-row cultivator is a post-emergent weed control tool, which is used to control large weeds in inch-row spaces. Inch-row cultivation controls the weeds by burning them, digging them out, or breaking them apart. This inch-row cultivator is steerable and allows for high-precision weed control with absolutely no damage if applied early during the 4th to 6th node stage. One pass with the inch-row cultivator is enough to control the majority of weeds in inch-row spaces. Such mechanical weed control tools as the rotary hoe, the harrow, and the inch-row cultivation were already tested in separate studies and exhibited great potential for weed control in organic cereals and pulses. So which of these tools is the best for weed control in organic field pea production? Single mechanical weed control tools resulted in insufficient weed suppression, while paired and multiple treatments reduced weed biomass by 73 to 86%. All mechanical weed control tools resulted in similar yield increase in range from 38 to 50% when compared to control treatments. We also found that field peas grown under organic seeding rate exhibited 13% higher yield response when compared to conventional seeding rate. Mechanical weed control tools exhibited similar performance in organic lentil. 2 applications with rotary hoe in combination with single inch-row cultivation in lentil grown under organic seeding rate resulted in 79% lower weed biomass and 40% yield increase in comparison with untreated check. In conclusion, notable weed suppression and yield benefits can be achieved with any of above-mentioned tools under appropriate management.
Anyways, that's a nicely done video by Alex. He did this on his own initiative, which I thought was great. The other interesting thing about it, the reason I like it so much is that's the only time that he spoke at that, I've heard him speak that slowly. So that's about 25% slower than he normally speaks, and I can understand most of what he's saying. So anyways, but he's a great kid. Okay, and Lena has taken this, starting to look in terms of flax as well. I talked about the seeding rates and going up to 2,000 seeds per square meter. I would have never thought you could rotary hoe flax, but you know, as you get the densities high enough, we're actually getting some benefits from it. And you know, some of the best treatments, again, are rotary hoeing and inter-row cultivation with a very high seeding rate. These will be disastrous if you don't increase your seeding rate. Of course, if you can only do one, I would certainly start with the very high seeding rate. And then it looks like the rotary hoe, in this case, the rotary hoe isn't providing quite as big of a yield benefit as the inter-row cultivation. So perhaps if you're starting somewhere and you have an inter-row cultivator, perhaps a real high seeding rate plus inter-row cultivation may be a good thing to investigate. So the conclusions is similar to the seeding rate one. Under weeding conditions, higher seeding rates were almost always agronomically and economically better. Mechanical weed control can achieve surprisingly high levels of weed control. Adding other methods also aids in weed control. And as I mentioned, good agronomy is good weed control. So let's move to the third phase, and we're going to talk about managing weed seed production. And this is drawing interest from conventional producers as well. If you go to Australia, where they have lots of herbicide resistance, this is where most of their focus is on reducing weed seed return. So another video of the comb cut. And we're clipping wild mustard primarily in peas. And there's clipping some Canada thistle. So if you're going to do that in Canada thistle, the concept behind this when I was in Europe was that you would actually, if you had a cereal crop, you would actually even cut very low, and it's not a moving cutter bar, so the idea is it shouldn't injure the wheat, cause too much injury to the cereal. Cut that thistle off below the cereal, and then allow the cereal to compete. So, you know, I think probably if you do grow some cover crops, that there may be some potential for this in managing thistle, where you could, but you'd have to be able to cut the thistle and not to do too much damage to the crop. So I haven't done any work on this. I don't think Steve has yet either. But for those of you that have maybe access to a comb cut or have a Canada thistle problem, something you might want to consider. Bourgault has built this, and we haven't used it yet, has built this really large mower, really. But again, this would allow you to clip at a fairly, if you're a larger farmer, a lot of acres to cover, this would allow you to cover a lot of acres. So I did some work in the late 90s with Pammy about this, and I thought, oh, this is a crazy idea. And our initial results were actually pretty good. And Pammy, all they did was actually modify a windrower in order to, and there's still plans on the internet if you just look for it, if you want a fairly inexpensive one. This was one built by a farmer quite a few years ago. It just had rotating chains. So there's a number of ways you can clip weeds. Now, in terms of the benefit you get from it is really just in reducing the amount of weeds the following year. So if you got a short crop, non-competitive crop like lentils or flax, there is some benefits in terms of in terms of reducing weed seed return and trying to reduce your problems for following years. So this is the original work I did with PAMI, and we had some promising results. It was kind of interesting when I showed this to some other scientists at the time. Things weren't so desperate for conventional growers in terms of weed control. We had a number of herbicides working in that, so it was kind of ignored by a number of people. And then more recently, a lot of those, not Steve, but a lot of the people that ignored it in the first place are getting on the bandwagon and doing research on it, which is fine. I'm glad to see that. But Steve's done some more work on weed clipping. It can be done on short crops, lentils, flax, perhaps short cereals. If you're doing that, I don't think it has a fit in cereals at all, really. In your cereals, you're better off to grow a competitive variety and try to control the weeds. Use weed clipping in your non-competitive crops. In terms of, does it improve your yield of your lentil and flax? If it does, it's just marginal, because by the time you're clipping, most of that crop competition has occurred. And so, of course, most weed seeds, most weed plants produce a lot of seeds, and that's their strategy for survival. And in this case, this actually was one of Steve's slides for a conventional group with herbicide resistance, but the same the concept still applies here. And so what we're trying to do is reduce the production of viable weed seeds, and we can target the weeds that mature before the crop. And one of these benefits that this particular practice would have over, let's say, a Harrington seed destructor or some sort of chaff collection and things like that, which are also beneficial. But if you got a shattering weed like wild oat, certainly by the time you're harvesting, a lot of that seed has been shattered. And but if you clip it, you can actually clip it before seed maturation and actually reduce the amount of wild oat seed going back to your seed bank. So this is wild mustard in lentils. There's what it looks like after it's clipped. And so the study that Lena's initiated has looked at the optimum clipping timing and frequency to minimize weed seed production and maximize crop yield. They've done it in both lentils and wheat. It doesn't work that good in wheat, so I'm just going to focus on lentils. Now they looked at different timings, weekly clipping beginning at mustard bolting. So the flowers just started to bolt, or the flowers just starting to show the first time they cut. And they'll cut once, twice, they'll clip once, twice, 3, 4, and 5 times. And then they have weedy and weed-free unclipped controls. If you look in terms of lentils yield, we see kind of a little bump. We don't get really any sort of yield benefit over the weedy check. And we don't approach the yields of the weed-free check, but there is a little bit of a yield bump when we do it very early, okay? At Saskatoon there was. We really didn't see. At Lacombe, though, there was a little bit of a bump when we did it at weeks 1 and 4, okay? So what we did find, though, in terms of yield, the later we did clip, we did see that yields did decline. So there was some benefits in terms of protecting yield by clipping early. And I think that just shows the same thing, yeah. Basically what that shows is that at week 1, there was a slight but non-significant benefit. At week 4, even a slight decrease in yield compared to the weedy check, and that could have been just from mechanical damage from the implement. Okay, if we look at seed production though, as I said, if we were to clip early, we got some yield benefits, but that was the poorest in terms of reducing seed production. So if you look, our best treatments at Saskatoon, and you wouldn't want to be doing this probably, but if we went out weekly, we reduced weed seed production, mustard seed production to almost zero. But you know, some of the ones just at week 3 clipping, a number of the clippings helped quite a bit, but there was some benefits if you look at Lacombe to go at weeks 1 and 4. So it's still fairly initial data, but I think if you were to go early to make sure you're protecting yield, and then go maybe 3 to 4 weeks afterwards to get your maximum reduction in weed seed production, because you know, if you clip a weed, it will regrow, and that might be your best combination. So there's unclipped versus clipped. This is looking at, just the number of clipping timings. So there really wasn't much benefit to clipping more than twice in terms of weed seed production, not enough to justify it. And, oh sorry, I'm backwards here. This is actually timing. You could see as we went later, so 3 to 4 weeks after bolting was probably our best timings, and our frequency, there wasn't much better benefit by going more than twice. So, this is just like, as I mentioned, this had been clipped earlier, and now they're out clipping the regrowth. And there doesn't seem to be, like I said, a big impact on yield. You can see as we increase the number of times we clip, maybe by going twice, and again, that would be going at week 1 and 4. But you're doing this for reducing your weed problems in following years, not to improve your yields in the year you're doing it. So you got a summary there. We got greatest mustard seed reduction with multiple clippings, greater seed reduction with later than earlier clipping, no strong evidence for yield increase or decrease, and they just finished their second year in lentil and wheat, so they'll have better recommendations in future years. Okay, so the last thing, I'm just about done in terms of time. The last thing I'll quickly go over is talking about managing weed seed shed and dispersal at harvest. And if Steve, way back when he was a graduate student doing his PhD at the University of Manitoba, he looked at chaff collection and what effect it had on dispersal of weed seeds like green foxtail and wild oats. And certainly if he was using a chaff collector, he wasn't really spreading those weeds anywhere. If he wasn't, you can see there was a fair amount of dispersion, basically as far as the combine would throw it. Chaff collection is getting very popular in Australia, and of course, their big problem down there is ryegrass. Ryegrass does remain on the plant well into harvest. It doesn't shatter very easily. So these tools work actually really good on ryegrass. And they're finding up to 85% control of ryegrass in terms of weed seed or weed germination the following year. And like I mentioned though, in order for this to work, the seeds have to be present at the time of harvesting. And we had a couple graduate students look at weed seed retention and weed seed shed, and we found that basically 1,200 growing degree days is about what it takes for wheat to mature, and with wild oat you're getting a fair amount of weeds shed by that time, about 30% of it's shattered, but cleavers, wild mustard, wild buckwheat, green foxtail, are all effective candidates. The other thing, though, is that the seeds have to be high enough on the plant. The Australians use a beer can. That's their tool for determining whether the weed's going to work or not. If the seed's above the height of a beer can, they think it'll work. So that's how technically they do it, and it works fine. And they're probably right. So cleavers, the only thing is actually most of the seed is higher up on the plant, but of course it likes to lie down, so you might not get it all as well. One thing they do in Australia is they put these things on the back of the combine, and it's a very simple device, and it concentrates the chaff rows into very narrow rows, and then they burn it afterwards, just the chaff rows. I'm surprised they're allowed to do it down there. When I was in South Australia, I wouldn't want to start a fire in the fall anywhere. But there is particular times they do it, and the temperatures have to get high enough for a short period of time in order to kill the weed seeds. But a lot of Western growers in Western Australia actually use this technique. The Harrington seed destructor is, we have one in Canada, and we've doing, Brianne Tideman at Lacombe Research Station's been doing quite a bit of work with this. I won't go into it too much. It's a fairly expensive machine, but it is effective. Just recently, the Seed Terminator was brought into Canada. There's a fellow just north of Saskatoon has one, and he's mounted it to, the nice thing about this is it really mounts right onto the combine, and so it's less expensive, less power required, and they've done quite a bit of engineering. I suggest you go to their website and look at it. Still fairly expensive, but it's less than $100,000, where, I don't know, the Harrington seed destructor was over $200,000. And this is actually video from north of Saskatoon. So I hope I've been able to share some useful information with you today. As with any farmer, in terms of weed control, there's no single silver bullet. And it requires a number of different management practices, a number of different techniques. Weeds are very adaptable, and so we have to use a number of strategies. Think of it as maybe even like antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and how you have to do a number of different techniques in order to manage it. Weeds have been around us since agriculture started. They adapt better than we do and than our crops do. So we'll always be trying to come up with new methods and integrated methods to try to manage them. I'd like to acknowledge all the people that are involved in this research, and this is just mainly Steve's crew. Sean Campbell and Terrence Zadunik, Steve Rye. He has a number of graduate students. He's got a huge crew. Lacombe also involved in that at the Scott Research Farm. We had a number of very good technicians that worked on this as well. And we've been very fortunate, Steve and I, to get a lot of funding for non-chemical weed control and organic weed control over the years. So I think I'll end there. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions. Would you repeat the question when they ask?
Yeah, okay. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Do you see a future with drones and sensing technology in weed removal and organic systems on a broad acre scale?
Yeah, okay, so the question is, do you see a future with drones in terms of weed removal in organic systems on a broad scale? I see a future in robotics, a huge future in robotics. There's lots of neat stuff And I think you'll be able to use maybe drones to then do site-specific weed control. So if you got, let's say, a real problem area developing, it'll certainly help in terms of identifying that problem early and maybe being able to resolve that problem. Now, specifically, I can't think of really any specifics offhand right now, but I'm certain that the technology can be adapted to help. If you have any ideas, I'm certainly, one of the younger people will be more interested in working on, or more likely to be working on it. I've got a limited shelf life here. Have I tried a rotary harrow? I have. That was one of the first implements I tried. Again, it's just a matter of setting the angle properly. So you don't want the angle to be too aggressive where you're causing too much injury. So I angled it about 45 degrees from perpendicular, if that makes sense to you. And yeah, it worked. Yeah. I think there's kind of a combination rotary harrow, rotary hoe out there now too that looks kind of interesting. So I think you can get any implement to work if you just spend some time with it. Any harrow or rotary hoe. Yeah. Good. Thank you.